So thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to this 1 hour We All Citizen talk about R3.0. This is around about 40 to 45 minutes of presenting work of R3.0 to give an overview of what we're doing, and then have a chance for you to ask questions and for us to answer that. Your two presenters today are myself, Ralph Thurm. I'm the Managing Director of R3.0, and my Senior Director colleague, Bill Bowie, who is here with us from Northern America at this moment. What we want to do in this 1 hour is give people who have heard about R3.0 but know little about it, just a little bit of an overview of who we are and where does R3.0 actually come from. Then we want to give a little bit of an overview of two of our recent major projects, the Sustainable Finance Blueprint Development and the Value Cycles Blueprint Development. Both are important for release at our 7th International Conference in September. So I want to say a little bit about that, and then we want to finish by also talking about another project that will be in consequence of the conference, the so-called R3.0 World Progress Report. So welcome everybody to this webinar, and we'll jump right in. And first want to start by saying a little bit of who we are. R3.0, that's possibly a strange name. It stands for Redesign for Resilience and Regeneration. And then there is the .0, and I tend to normally say we want to do things beyond a zero negative impact line, so to say. So we want to really move towards regeneration and thriving. So that's what R3.0 really means. The orientation that I wanted to give, just need to quickly check something here. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just needed to quickly see if the recording really works. Just a little.
Yes, it's on.
It's on. Okay, thank you, Bill.
Yep.
Because I don't see it here anymore when I'm presenting. Okay, R3.0 promotes redesign for resilience and regeneration. We are a common good not-for-profit platform, so a not-for-profit organization, and we are structuring a crowdsourced approach for recommendations for necessary transformations in diverse fields and sectors. We do that in order to achieve a thriving, regenerative, and distributive economy and society. So that is sort of the end goal, the North Star of everything what we're doing here. What you have here on that slide as well are a couple of the social media and website links in order to find us on the internet and in different social media. Those are the accounts that we're using. A little bit about what we call our work ecosystem. Reporting 3.0, or now called R3.0, started in 2013, and in 2015 started to define a basic work ecosystem, which means what are the areas that need to simultaneously leapfrog in order to put us into a situation where we can really serve the idea of a regenerative and distributive economy. The projects that we've been doing based on that backcasting that I was describing was writing so-called blueprints. And these blueprints are always the outcome of a one-year project with a group of international experts. And the 4 first blueprints that we've written and published define the basic pillars of our foundational work ecosystem. So the first one was really on reporting. How would reporting look if it truly served the idea of a regenerative and distributive economy? A second blueprint was on accounting. So how would accounting need to change in order to serve reporting that helps with the green, inclusive, and open or regenerative and distributive economy? The third blueprint then looked at data and data architecture that's needed in order to serve accounting and reporting. And the fourth one was then looking at if these other 3 blueprints are working well, how would business model design be different towards what it is right now? So those are the 4 pillars of the generic work ecosystem, and questions that we got were then, okay, how would we then actually implement that in an organization? And that is where our 5th blueprint comes from, which we call the transformation journey blueprint. It's a step-by-step process that helps organizations to implement value creation processes. With that first generation, we were then thinking about additional blueprints. Those are really areas within those 4 pillars that need more deepening. And 2 of them are actually also what we're going to present to quite a degree today, in sort of an overview. And that is, first of all, the Sustainable Finance Blueprint, which will be released as a final version at our September conference, as well as the Value Cycles Blueprint. We had public comment drafts released earlier, and we're now in the process of finalizing these 2 blueprints. And then furthermore, we have plans for 2 more blueprints, one around educational transformation, and another one that we will actually now call systemic governance and funding. Both of them are still in the conceptual or in the fundraising phase. That gives you an overview of, in total, 9 different blueprints that define the R3.0 work ecosystem. That's sort of what we see as sort of rather complete in order to get all these different areas towards a regenerative and distributive economy. We want to start with now presenting the first of those 2 new blueprints. This one is around sustainable finance, with Bill and myself as the lead authors of that. As we said, it was out already as a draft for public comment, and we're in the process of finalizing it for release at the conference. And I just want to still do this slide here, which really asks the most important question, and that is, does sustainable finance really exist? If we just look at the situation that we have right now, where we say the goal of creating sustainable finance is predicated on the assumption that we currently live in an unsustainable finance regime with enough empirical evidence, like the planetary boundaries show us that, donut economics, ecological footprints, the great acceleration research streams, all the hockey stick figures, we can conclude that at this moment it's systemically unsustainable. So our current system is best defined as inhabiting advanced stages of overshoot and collapse. So really clearly transformation is needed if humanity wishes to create a truly sustainable finance system that can fuel the transition to a regenerative and distributive economy. So when you want to ask yourself what the blueprint then does, is asking this really fundamental question. Do all current sustainable finance initiatives set us on a path of transformation to such a new and sufficient finance and economic system? And the answer that you might foresee that already, but the answer that we give is a resounding no. It's not yet there, and therefore the need for a blueprint. So this is what the blueprint really does. It is to propose an alternative pathway that shows promise of achieving bona fide sustainable finance. So what the blueprint really covers in various chapters is, first of all, showing how existing finance is embedded in our unsustainable economic system. Really looking at the shortcomings of perpetual growth and debt, and in how far that is sustainable. It's not sustainable. It looks at the 5 fatal flaws of finance based on the work of Jen Fullerton, and looks at necessary cultural evolution of economics based on the work of Joe Brewer. And then the blueprint really looks at what is sustainable finance then, what's the current status. So we try to define sustainable finance based on scientific and ethical norms, and show the current status of initiatives under the banner of sustainable finance. And we have looked at many of the existing ones. And as an outcome of that, we come with a theory of transformation for sustainable finance, where we are proposing so-called enabling factors, activation factors, and transformation factors, and then give recommendations to all of the different players, direct and indirect players in the financial markets world. To sum this up, this is the way how the blueprint is actually structured. You see the enabling factors in dark blue, and embedded in there the activation factors in a little bit lighter blue. Both of them, you can say, and we have been, prompted to that, would all still sit in our existing financial system. Therefore, we added another layer. Those are the transformation factors, and those would help to transform the system. So what this blueprint really goes into in much depth, at first looking at the sort of what is wrong with our financial system, it then proposes enabling activation and transformation factors. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bill to go a little bit deeper into some of those aspects.
Great, thanks, Ralph. So as Ralph mentioned, we start the Sustainable Finance Blueprint off with a question of what is sustainable finance and what is its current status. So actually, I'll go right into the next slide in terms of what the definition is. So this is what we typically draw on in terms of defining sustainability. This is our sense of the best definition of sustainability. It was first put forth by Mark McElroy in his Social Footprints dissertation in 2008 from the University of Groningen, excuse me. What it says is that sustainability can be measured or conceptualized as S equals A over N. So the S equals sustainability. If you can click through on that, Ralph, that'd be great.
Sure.
So S equals, sustainability equals actual impacts over normative impacts. So the actual impacts are, this is what an organization is literally doing. So if you think of it in terms of climate, it would be the carbon footprint of the company. A normative impact is, what would that impact need to be in order to be sustainable? So in the carbon example, that would be the carbon budget. So a sustainability quotient for climate would be carbon budget over, carbon footprint over carbon budget. And we call this numeration, so the numerator over the denominator, denomination. And we draw that from our colleague and partner, Alan White, the co-founder of the Global Reporting Initiative. And he pointed out that essentially the last 2 decades, at least, if not more than that, of work in so-called sustainability has really been numeration focused. So we're really just focused on getting what's the actual impact. We are just starting to look at what the normative impacts need to be. So in essence, we're really just at the very beginnings of measuring, managing, and addressing actual sustainability. And the fine print here is, these are impacts on the carrying capacities of vital capital resources. So carrying capacities is a concept that's probably first and best known from the Limits to Growth report from 1972 of Dana Meadows. They talk about carrying capacities, and we address that in the report. Vital capital resources is the multiple capitals. So not just financial capital, but natural capital, social capital, etc. So we'll go on from there to note that even though the requirement to take this normative or thresholds-based approach to sustainability reporting has been in place for almost 2 decades. It was put in place with the Sustainability Context Principle in the 2nd generation of Global Reporting Initiative guidelines in 2002. But as you can see from this study of all corporate responsibility reports, 40,000 of them between 2000 and 2013, that's the dark red is all 40,000. The smaller light red is 5% of companies in that time even mentioned the idea that there are ecological limits. And then that tiny little dot is there were only 31 companies in a universe of 12,000 companies in the study that actually said, oh yes, ecological limits do impact our performance measurements or our product development. So we take this to mean that essentially there are no sustainability reports in the world. We have yet to see a report that actually addresses sustainability across all of the triple bottom line or all of the multiple capitals. We address this in a conceptual way in a paper that we just did for the UNRISD, the United Nations Research Institute on Social Development, and this helps to understand this, this conceptualization. It's the three-tiered typology, where tier one is incrementalist numeration. So that's just the numerator on actual impacts. That can also include relative or intensity indicators that are to some non-normative relationships, such as, what's your carbon emissions compared to your revenue. That's relative, but it's not normative. Tier two is contextualized denomination, where the denominator actually ties that actual impact to an ecological or social threshold. So you can think of Kate Raworth's donut there. It's literally tying it to the donut. And tier three is activating transformation. This recognizes that when we're in a system that does not do contextualization, that does not do the thresholds, it actually takes a transformation at the systemic level to make that happen. So that's the three-tiered typology. We are actually just finishing up a white paper with the International Integrated Reporting Council. Literally just put the final draft in the email. And this is looking at the shift from monocapitalism to multi-capitalism. Monocapitalism is capitalism that only focuses on increasing one capital, financial capital. Multi-capitalism does two things. It looks across all of the capitals and looks not to increase any one of them, but rather create dynamic balance in them. And the second thing it does is it respects those carrying capacities. So as you can see, section 3.2 talks about the carrying capacities of the capitals, respecting the thresholds in ecologically and socially, as well as the allocations. So allocations means how much of this threshold is any one business responsible for respecting. We then include some case studies in section 4, including a number of companies that are taking this multi-capitalist approach, as well as at the meso level, the call for asset owner integrated reporting. And then at the macro level, we include 2 case studies. One is where Ernst & Young used the multi-capital scorecard at the national level. And then the next one is, and somebody's, if somebody could go on mute, there's a little bit of background noise there. The Wellbeing Economy Governments, WeGo Alliance, is directly supported by We All and pertains to the governments of New Zealand, Iceland, Scotland, and Wales, applying well-being economics.
Well,
Next slide.
Thanks, Bill. Just very quickly on this one, we said that we would look at most of the existing initiatives around sustainable finance. We looked at earlier initiatives like UNFI, UNPRI, the Sustainable Stock Exchange, GRI, and early ESG and SRI benchmarks, but also looked at many of the current initiatives, including, for example, the UNEP inquiry that Simon Sadek has been doing, the TCFD, the new EU taxonomy for sustainable finance growth, the non-financial reporting directive of the EU. As a country example, the German Sustainable Finance Cluster, UN Principles for Responsible Banking, and then finally the Central Bank Supervisors Network for Greening the Financial System. We were looking at it from a couple of really necessary ingredients for sustainable finance, and the result of our assessment was rather sober. there's a general and rather complete lack of understanding of what sustainable finance actually entails. The root cause of this shortcoming is the lack of understanding and implementation of sustainability context, as Bill explained it. The assessed current initiatives do so far no cure to that shortcoming of understanding. They're very much lost in a lot of detail, while that basic piece of homework has not been done yet. So what it needs really for all of these organizations is still a major mindset shift to return to what sustainability context actually entails. And there's, from our perspective, also a huge opportunity connected to that, to cut to the chase and be the main driver for that mindset shift. It just needs to happen. And that, I think, there's one sentence which clarifies that. What we do as R3.0 is very much based on the idea of doing what is necessary. And what we see with a lot of these organizations really is that they do what's practically possible or politically opportune. And that, in all of those cases that we assessed and really looked closely into, is not enough to actually call it sustainable. Carrie, could you go on mute, please? Thank you. Okay, so that just to illustrate why there is a need for sustainable finance and this blueprint. Bill, over to you again.
Great. So we look at the activation factors for sustainable finance as a way of giving some a sense of what could be addressed in the existing financial system. And we break that into 4 areas. The most important of those is the scope section, where we look at 3 different trajectories, you could say, on this axis. One of them is moving from ESG integration to threshold investing. The next one is to move from impact valuation, which is the state of the art right now, that basically monetizes impacts as if that will magically make them disappear. And we call for moving to system value assessment, which is more than just monetizing them. It's actually looking at them compared to the carrying capacity. And then finally, this move from monocapitalism to multi-capitalism that I mentioned earlier with the IIRC report. And then it addresses specific recommendations or things that can be done right now, and gives examples of them in the policy and governance section, practice and performance, and engagement. Next slide. And then finally, this was in particular the benefit of taking a working group approach. One of our working group members, Will Saul from Regen Network, pointed out that we're not actually talking about a regenerative finance system unless we talk about transformation factors. So we added those in and clustered them under 3 foundational transformation factors. Holism, that's best described in the work of John Fullerton, as well as regeneration, and then transforming economies to function as ecosystems, as our partner James Quilligan of Economic Democracy Advocates points out. Then we look at the functional transformation factors, what would actually need to happen. We need to move to a post-growth economy. It would need to be multi-scale, and in particular be seated at the bioregional level as compared to trying to make change only from the top down. And then finally, it would shift to prioritizing mutualism. In other words, using cooperation instead of competition as the core driving factor. So those are the transformation factors. We then cluster all of these into a set of recommendations for sustainable finance under the enabling factors, activation factors, and transforming factors. And those you can look at in more depth in the report itself. Again, the public comment version is available. I put the link into the chat box. And we will be releasing the final at our conference, which we'll mention shortly. Over to you, Ralph, for the value cycles blueprint. Oh,
Okay.
actually, sorry, I'll didn't get the prompt there. I'll continue in on the value
Yes,
cycles
please.
blueprint. Thank you, Ralph. So this is the second blueprint that we're working on concurrently. It also just finished up its public comment period, and it's looking to address both the question of value and the question of cycles, moving from value chains and a linear approach to the circular economy, and then even transcending the limitations of the circular economy to look at system value cycles. So next slide. So essentially the foundation of this is the recognition that we are in a, what Peter Tunjic, the Australian corporate lawyer who looks at business models through a thermodynamic lens, calls a value crisis, where we're basically transforming the capitals, but it's an inefficient form of transformation where we get more money but less value. And that's the paradox at the root of neoclassical economics, is it does this kind of what he calls decapitalization, where the capitals that really matter, our core resources, get diminished while this ethereal capital of finance gets enhanced and gets concentrated in the hands of a few. So this is the paradox that underlies the value crisis that is the basis of this blueprint. Next slide. So what James Quilligan, who I mentioned earlier, what he says is that we now have an opportunity to create a system of value that is equitable, sustainable, and inclusive. And this calls to tapping into our heart and actualizing the deep-seated yearning for interconnectedness. So that's a key terminology here. Mariana Mazzucato picks up on this and talks about value creation as collective. So again, this goes against the neoliberal idea that value is created individually, and recognizes that actually value is always created collectively. And so she sees this as underpinning the creation of a new economics of hope that really taps into our dreams for a better future, making it happen in ways that if we don't do that, why would we even care about value, she says. So next slide. So this is the core of what we're saying, is that we're in a value crisis where the dominant conception of value places a price tag on life in order to chase the ghost of perpetual progress. Ironically, it has resulted in the exact opposite, overall degeneration that now threatens the life-sustaining functions of our planetary home. However, crisis is an inflection point. So we have the opportunity to use this inflection point to pivot to a new system of value that is animated by our hearts, hopes, and dreams, and fed by interconnection and regeneration. What would that transformation to a new system of value look like? Is it possible? These are the questions that we ask in the value cycles blueprint. So in so doing, we first identify the fatal flaws of our current conceptions of value, as well as the dead-end directionality of it. And the shortcomings of our current efforts at reformation instead of transformation. So we call for a radical reconceptualization of our system of value centered on system value. System value is a regime that creates value across all systems, ecological, social, and economic. And it also makes the case for transcending our current infatuation with circularity, recognizing that nature works not only in circles, but also in cycles, as well as in spirals. And thanks to the work of Martine, who's on this call, we really got the clarification that it's a question of proportionality or fractal design. Depends on where you're looking as to whether you see the economy operating in a line, in a circle, in a cycle, or a spiral. And so we really need to recognize where we are in that fractal system to understand what the economy is functioning like. Next slide.
Yeah, and that slide actually goes to me, Bill. Just to give you, like with the Sustainable Finance Blueprint, a bit of an outline of how this value cycles blueprint is structured. First of all, of course, an introduction looking at value and at cycles. Then we look deeper into value and recreate the story from shareholder value through to shared value to valuism, valuation, and impact valuation, which is quite hot at this moment. And we go even that step further to system value, and then marry that with the nano perspective of intrinsic value. So what values we as individuals actually feel and act upon. Then we look at the question of cycles, also reconstruct the developments there from the typical Porter's value chain model towards that new idea of the circular economy, also looking into shortcomings of that circular economy, and then broaden that with aspects around thermodynamic accounting, bioregional circulation, and then come out with ideas around our cyclical economy. And that leads us to sort of a synthesis chapter where we bring these things together, where system and value and cycle actually serve the idea of regeneration and thriving. We look into how that system synthesized know-how also represents itself in the R3.0 work ecosystem, and then develop a baseline of a regenerative and distributive economy out of that, and then have targeted recommendations as well. Like that's what we normally do in all of our blueprints. So this is just an overview of those major chapters in the value cycles blueprint: the value chapter, the cycles chapter, and then the synthesis, which goes deeper on a good half dozen of different topics, where we actually develop that idea of a regenerative and distributive economy based on all of the background that the other chapters have actually developed before that. Just quickly on value before I give back to Bill. Like I said, we reconstructed that history of value and come up with system value as our proposal to systemically and holistically find a way how to make sure that everything that we do on every level actually adds to the system, and only then it adds to regeneration and thriving. And then, of course, how is that motivated by our own intrinsic value? Bill, over to you again on system value.
Great. So we use the IIRC's octopus graphic, which actually has 12 legs there, but there isn't an animal that has 12 legs that's easily definable like that. And as you can see, it looks at the multiple capitals as inputs into a business model that transforms those capitals into outputs that then create outcomes. The field has essentially taken two more steps after that. In addition to outcomes, there are impacts, or in other words, what of those outcomes is attributable to any organization. And then that results in what BASF in this graphic that we've stolen from them calls value to society. So what is the ultimate value? We actually frame that slightly differently because the BASF version of impact valuation has some holes in it. We call it system value in ways that look at the carrying capacities of the capitals, or look at it in a thresholds-based way. Next slide. So the best definition of system value in our estimation actually comes from this IIRC background paper from 2013, before the framework even came out. This is the famous paragraph 58 from this paper. And it doesn't even mention system value, but it aligns. It says, ultimately, value is to be interpreted by reference to thresholds and parameters established through stakeholder engagement and evidence about the carrying capacity and limits of resources on which stakeholders and companies rely for well-being and profit. Interconnections, as we noted earlier, interconnections are key. Interconnections between corporate activity, society, and the environment, and the purpose of the corporation should therefore be understood in terms of what the corporation, society, and the environment can tolerate and still survive. That will be the main determinant of value. So the challenge is reaching agreement on this about what those thresholds and limits are, how the resources within those limits should be allocated, and what action is needed to keep activity within those limits so that value can continue to be created over time. That encapsulates our sense of system value very well. This actually didn't get into the IARC framework, and that's what we're hoping can happen in this revision of the IARC framework that's happening as we speak. Next slide. So this is just the idea of system value is one that was first put forth by Jeff Kendall of the Future Fit Business Benchmark. And it shows what we go through in the report of moving from shareholder value, where the priority is financial value, to business, with environment and society completely separate and subservient, to the Porter and Kramer idea of shared value, where we'll do it if it still creates business value. That's the priority. If it happens to benefit environment and society, great. We need to move to a system of system value, where actually the value of the environment is prioritized first. How society fits into the environment is the second layer of value, and business value is subservient to both of those. So really flipping things on its head.
Right, thanks, Bill. And that was just an excerpt of one of the subchapters of the value chapter in the Value Cycles Blueprints. We don't have enough time to go into depth into all of that. That is why we've made that selection, and do the same thing here with the Cycles chapter. Just again, as an overview, we look at the historic development from value chains to the circular economy, and then add thermodynamic accounting, bioregional circulation, and cyclical economy to that mix in order to present our recommendations. Bill, back to you. And there is Martijn.
Great, yeah, and thank you, Martin, for being on the call. He actually summarizes the notion of thermodynamic accounting very well, where we need a fundamental understanding of how our systems are bound to thermodynamics to create effective policies which preserve the systemic thresholds that represent our values. So this really ties into the beginning quote from Peter Tunjic, who looks to basically conceptualize business models and the economy in ways that are consistent with thermodynamics instead of flouting thermodynamic theory. In terms of bioregional circulation, this draws on the work of John Fullerton from the Capital Institute. Here are his 8 principles of regenerative economics. Robust circulation is one of those principles. Honors, place, and community is another. And empowered participation is a third. All of those play out at the bioregional level as the most effective scale at which to transform our system of value creation. Next slide. So in terms of bioregional circulation, our friend and colleague Joe Brewer states it best that we need to create developmental pathways for the emergence of these regional scale economic systems that harmonize with the ecosystems around them. So this would create supply chains that close the loop in ecological terms, in the sense that they're not creating waste beyond the assimilative capacity of nature. And they're also tapping into the regenerative capacities of raw materials. So these are the 2 ways to keep things flowing. To create bioregional economies, we need to design for the selection mechanisms that stabilize social systems around functional landscapes, watersheds, for example. And this notion of selection is key. Joe is thereby referencing to aligning with evolutionary biology. The term multi-level selection is the deeper term that he's referring to there. So this would create financial signals that create bioregional circulation. This quote we include, I won't go over the whole thing, but the key here is that Fullerton is tapping into this notion of nested fractal relationships across different levels. And that way we understand how the parts fit in with the whole. And if you go to the next slide, we'll come back to our friend Martine, who describes this better than we can. So both circular and linear aspects are integrated scale aspects of a fractal economy. What we need to do is create multi-dimensional proportionality within this fractal structure. So we can reduce these issues to look at their feedback loops that maintain healthy proportionality. And that prevents essentially local runaway processes that would threaten this proportionality. So we've diverged from this healthy sense over the last, say, 100 to 500 years. And perhaps the key is that we're seeing unwanted subtle butterfly effects instead of a staggeringly failed linear economic system. So what Martine is proposing here is that the linearity is just out of whack with the fractal proportionality, and thereby getting back into a proportional system is the key. It may not be as hard as we are thinking. So that would allow for a slow and resilient thermodynamic saturation process to happen. So that's another word for saying dying. So in other words, entropy will continue to happen thermodynamically, but if we create healthy systems that tap into syntropy, or the resistance of entropy, or the staving off of entropy, that's what can create the most health in the meanwhile. So it's a way of maintaining a healthy economy in an ecosystem perspective. Over to you, Ralph, for this slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this is really now just the overview of the chapter that tries to synchronize values and cycles and systems for serving regeneration and thrivability, and how we are developing an idea of a regenerative and distributive economy that is based on those principles. And Bill, over to you for those build-outs here.
Yeah, so essentially, and this really is saying what we've said before, so we don't have to dwell on it too much, but basically the key is to create system value, and to do that through value cycles, and that creates what we call system value cycles. So that's what this blueprint draws you through. We visualize this in a redesign of our original strategy continuum, which we now call a maturation matrix, which the changes that we've made is, instead of having 5 phases on the horizontal axis, we just have 4, with really the third phase is really just a dividing line between sustainable and unsustainable. On the left-hand side, it's either degenerative or improving towards sustainability. On the right-hand side, we're into the sustainable zone that has moved from incrementalism to transformation, shifting to regeneration and thrivability. We see this at the nano individual level, the micro organizational level, the meso sector portfolio or habitat level, the micro level of economic, ecological, and social systems, and then the supra level of the existential level, essentially. And it requires scale linking or linking between all of these scales, not doing it at one scale exclusively, but all together. And that triggers what I mentioned before of multi-level selection, or the idea of Darwin's natural selection that actually functions at the group level. And we just mapped out some of the concepts there into these different cells that you'll be able to see in more detail when we share the slides in the future.
Yeah,
back over to you, Ralph.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And this is just a nice example of how things are moving over time through the development of the different blueprints in our work ecosystem. The same is actually true for this one here. We had a first version of this, which we called Desiderata for a Regenerative and Distributive Economy, where we really try to very concisely show the main fields of activity that are necessary to come to a regenerative and distributive economy. We now call this a regenerative and distributive economy on one page, because over the last couple of years, we have had advanced versions of this, and this is a very concise outcome of many, many years of work, where it really tries to put the most important, let's say, leapfrogs into that one slide. And we clustered it into ecologic regeneration, economic regeneration, and social and cultural regeneration, and directly already also connected that to the necessary capitals that would be involved. As you heard us saying, you know, context-based multi-capitalism is really the major part of the homework that still needs to get done before we get even deeper in some of the areas. I'm not going to go through these in depth, because you will have the recording, and anybody who wants to have the slides can get them from us, no problem. It's just normally one of those slides where people say, wow, you know, there's somebody who really achieved to put the idea of a regenerative and distributive economy really on one page, whereas 800 reports before the Rio +20 summit were not able to do that. So that shows some of the distilled outcome of our very systemic, holistic work ecosystem thinking. I'll now shift over to our conference. So we are finishing those 2 chapters around the 2 blueprints, and would like to alert you to our forthcoming 7th International Reporting R3.0 conference. The important thing here is to note that we now have decided for a conference structure that we will use for multiple years, because we are nearing sort of the natural end of our blueprint work ecosystem. We think all the necessary components are there. Future will show if that's true. But in general, we think we are now at reaching a rather stable plateau where we can keep that conference structure for a couple of years. And this slide even shows that even more. There are like 8 different focus areas that we bundled into 4x2 focus areas. The first one is science and behavior. The second one is finance and growth. The third one is value and circularity. And the fourth one is education and governance. And to a certain degree, you see how how this bundling is connected to the sort of second generation of our blueprints around stable finance, around the value cycles, and forthcoming transformational educational transformation, and systemic governance and funding. So they are not married, so to say, as they are showed here in 4x2. Those are 8 sort of discrete focus areas. We just collected them into these bundles of 4x2 for the sake of the structure of the conference. And what is shown on this slide here is a couple of, or the keynote speakers of the conference. We're actually really, really happy that we have this extremely high level of keynote speakers at our conference once more, I have to say, because the last couple of years have been stunning when it came to the selection to keynote speakers already as well. So that structure is important actually for the last slide, which I wanted to show, because it's also the basis of the forthcoming first R3.0 World Progress report. It will be framed around these 8 focus areas of the conference. It summarizes sort of a state of play, also as a result of what we hear at the conference. It also uses the UNRISD R3.0 3-tier typology that Bill was already explaining earlier. And it introduces sort of world-leading market-making solutions involving some of our advocacy partners and academic alliance partners. And the aim is really that it becomes yearly sort of very concise benchmark, and also comes with recommendations to various constituencies, like very issue-specific networks and institutions, like policymakers, standard setters, but also to the corporate world and their industry sectors. And the aim is really to reach far-reaching recognition with that report, like we see with the yearly World Economic Forum risk report, or the global footprint report, or the world happiness report. So really making it another piece of the puzzle of important reports on a yearly basis. And last but not least, what we tried is to offer a systemic and holistic transformational view on how far we are actually reaching a regenerative and distributive economy. And we have not seen a report anywhere near that would actually give us that sort of overview and the benchmarking possibility for that as well. So that's what we wanted to show to you in this 1 hour session. Thanks for listening. We'll have time for questions in a minute. Just wanted to let you know that, please be in touch with us, with regard to the conference. Most of the important stuff is actually collected at the conference website right away. We also ask people to support our R3.0 World Progress report. Contact us if you have interest to join either the Educational Transformation Blueprint. As I said, we always have global working groups delivering on those blueprints. And the same is, of course, true for the Systemic Governance and Funding Blueprint as well. We also have so-called test labs. That might be an idea for some of those organizations who look for deeper collaboration with our knowledge and the blueprints. On our website, you'll find a couple of examples of those, and we're quite open for more of those. And of course, everybody here on the call and your organizations, you can become an education partner or an academic alliance partner of R3.0 as well. So those were just some ways to connect with us in the next couple of weeks and months. And I'll stop my screen share now to have us all back here and put us on gallery mode to be able to receive questions. And if somebody has a question, I would recommend, because the group is not too big, that you unmute yourself and that you would actually ask your questions right away. And maybe a quick show of hand before, if you have a question, then we can focus on you. So just checking if anybody has a question.
I could start. Quick question.
Okay.
So this is really impressive and great body of work. I'm wondering who's paying attention.
I can take that one. The Sustainable Finance Blueprint in particular, we are getting indications that it is catching people's attention. So for example, there is an initiative that we're involved with called Imperative 21, I think it's called. It's like the B team and B Lab and some big players like that. There's a subgroup on systems change in the finance realm, and we just had a meeting recently where Delilah, I forget her last name, of the pre-distribution initiative specifically pointed out the work of the Sustainable Finance Blueprint. And so that, that went to people like Bob Eccles, who's very influential in the finance realm. So that's just one example. I feel like we're getting more attention than we have in the past because the body of the blueprints is now better known. Also getting attention in outside of sort of more mainstream areas, in particular, a lot of grassroots attention to our work.
Yeah, and I would also add, Bill, we had drafts for public comment out, and we did get quite some good feedback on that. So
Yes,
that adds to the response to that question. And of course,
yeah, sorry, I'm just attentive to time. It's 10:59, and we do have to get off of this room for an 11 o'clock call that's following. I did notice that Mila asked, how can I get involved? So in particular, you can become an advocation partner or academic alliance partner. And if you want to get involved more deeply, we would welcome that. We have 2 working groups that are starting up for the Educational Transformation Blueprint and for the Systemic Governance and Funding Blueprint. So that's 2 working groups of about 20 to 40 experts globally each. So plenty of opportunity to get involved, and the conference, of course, is a way to get involved.
Yeah, like what I showed on the last slide. There's quite enough. Okay, I'm going to finish the recording here.